Rewind, your week in review, is sponsored by the Wisconsin Realtors Association, bringing Wisconsin communities to life with great homes, businesses, and neighborhoods. The Wisconsin Realtors Association, the voice of real estate.
This week on Rewind, your week in review.
President Trump supporters fight Democrat Joe Biden's Wisconsin win in federal and state courts and at a Capitol hearing. Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice Brian Hagedorn breaks ties and dismisses appeals of Trump supporters. A think tank warns that state spending will exceed tax collections, forcing tough budget decisions on the governor and lawmakers. And state officials can't explain a sharp drop in COVID-19 testing statewide. Rewind, your week in review for December 11th.
I'm Steve Walters.
And I'm J.R. Ross.
The Electoral College meets Monday to determine the next president of the United States. And President Donald Trump's campaign and his supporters are now in three venues, either challenging the results, Democrat Joe Biden's win in Wisconsin, or how the Wisconsin election was conducted. We just had an important ruling on that issue, and you will hear from the judge. But let's give an overview first of those three challenges. First of all, the Texas Attorney General has asked the U.S. Supreme Court to void Mr. Biden's wins in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. If those Biden victories were thrown out, Mr. Biden would not have the necessary electoral votes to be declared president. And secondly, President Trump's campaign has appealed the state Supreme Court ruling denying immediate venue, challenging the votes in Dane and Milwaukee counties, and you're about to hear from the judge in that ruling. Third, as we speak, the elections panels, the elections committees of both the Assembly and the Senate are hearing testimony about what the co-chairman, Assembly Representative Ron Tessler, said are thousands of complaints of irregularities in Wisconsin's November 3 elections. Now, before I give JR a comment, let's hear from a ruling by former Racine County Judge Stephen Simonik in the case, the appeal of the recounts in Dane and Milwaukee counties. Let's hear from the judge. It just came down about an hour ago. Please.
Because the court is satisfied, the rules and guidelines applied in each of the disputed areas are reasonable and a correct interpretation of the underlying early absentee voting laws. The certification of the results of the 2020 Wisconsin presidential election after the Dane County and Milwaukee County recounts is affirmed. The certified results show Joseph Biden and Kamala Harris received 1,630,866 votes, and Donald Trump and Michael Pence received 1,610,184 votes, a difference or margin of victory of 20,682 votes in favor of Biden and Harris. The determination of the court is that the petitioner appellants here have not demonstrated that an erroneous interpretation of Wisconsin early voting laws happened here. And in the complaint, there really is no allegation here of widespread fraud. That's not the issue. There is no credible evidence of any misconduct or wide-scale fraud.
Okay, JR, the importance of that ruling and the potential appeal immediately to the state Supreme Court that Trump attorney James Trupis will be coming very, very soon. Please.
So basically, Trump and his allies are 0 for 5 right now in Wisconsin, and I think they're going to lose some more. So pull back a little bit. Remember, with this case, what's I think important to note is the Supreme Court originally said, we're not going to take it on direct filing. Got to go, law says, circuit court first. There were a lot of teeth gnashing about Brian Hagedorn, a conservative justice in the court, because of his position that this should start with the circuit court level. If you think about it, if the Trump campaign had followed the law as written and gone to the circuit court first last Tuesday when it filed the state Supreme Court, they would already be before the state Supreme Court right now getting a decision from the state's highest court on these arguments. Now, you would have had the question about the appeals court. You could have petitioned a bypass or some things you have to do there. What I'm getting at is the Trump campaign took a risk. It took a bet that because of a conservative majority in the Supreme Court, it would take the case directly and they could skip these other processes. And they bet wrong. And now they're in a time crunch because of their own actions, because now here we are Friday morning. If the Trump campaign is going to appeal this, they've got to file a petition with the Supreme Court, got to have a petition to bypass. You have to have arguments over the weekend. And on Monday, the Electoral College meets. After that college meets and the votes are cast, this doesn't matter anymore. Now, there is talk about trying to challenge a vote on the floor of Congress in January. But for all intents and purposes, once we pass Monday, this is all moot. So there's that. Now, we also have two other cases that filed directly with the straight Supreme Court saying, take our arguments for an overturn of the Wisconsin election. Court said no. There was a federal ruling on Wednesday night because Sidney Powell, her quote-unquote Kraken lawsuits around the country, it was rejected. The judge there said this was an inappropriate request of the judicial branch to overturn the will of the voters. That was shot down. We have another federal judge who has the Trump campaign lawsuit, which wants to throw out the election results and have the entire issue of who gets Wisconsin electoral votes put in the front of the state legislature. That judge has used the words bizarre and odd to describe the request. He's going to rule at any minute now. Doesn't look good for him on that front. So right now, the president doesn't have a great batting average. And if you look at the lawsuit filed by the Texas Attorney General, I think there are a couple things to note there. One, you have at least, I think, 17 attorneys general from around the country who signed on to this lawsuit, which has been described by people on both sides of the aisle as legally dubious. And in Wisconsin specifically, it raises 2 points. One, the chances of President Trump losing Wisconsin, considering his lead at 3 a.m. on the morning of November 4th. We weren't done counting votes at 3 a.m. on November 4th in Wisconsin. That is the irrelevant statistics. Number two, one of the points of evidence it points to trying to bolster its case is that there's this U.S. Postal Service whistleblower who says that there was a directive in Wisconsin to gather thousands of ballots and backdate them the date that they were postmarked. That doesn't matter in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, all that matters is when the absentee ballot is received. I don't care if those ballots are backdated till September. Unless they're received by 8 p.m. on election night, it does not matter in Wisconsin. These are just examples of like the reaches that we're seeing, these various efforts trying to overturn the votes in Wisconsin. Now, I will tell you, in talking to people on both sides of the aisle, there are legitimate questions to be asked about, did the Wisconsin Elections Commission give appropriate advice in how this election was run? Did it exceed its authority? I think there are real questions there. However, the remedy being sought, which is throwing out ballots, I can't find many attorneys, other than those who are involved or getting paid to be part of these lawsuits, who tell me, yeah, they think there's a chance for President Trump to have millions of ballots in Wisconsin thrown out and have the election thrown to the state legislature.
Right. So you and I as journalists, we're checking every minute, we're regularly checking for one of these federal court rulings, either by the U.S. Supreme Court or by federal judge. Who is it?
Wait, he was
Brett
by
Ledley.
Trump. Answered that because he was appointed by Trump with the support of both Tammy Baldwin and Ron Johnson. We have a system in Wisconsin where you kind of have to come to consensus on the nominees. So he's not a true Trump appointee in the idea that he's like somebody who's picked by Trump directly. He's identified by a commission. There's a pool of finalists that get backing from both U.S. senators.
Right. And Governor Evers has repeatedly called the Trump appeals of the Biden win that he certified ridiculous. Okay, let's just spend a few seconds, JR, on the joint Assembly and Senate elections and committee hearing going on right now. In his opening statement, the co-chair, Representative Tussler, said LAB, the Legislative Audit Bureau, should audit the Milwaukee County election procedures. So I was just curious, any response to any of the testimony that you're hearing prior to our taping the show?
A couple of things. Dean Knutson is a Republican appointee to the State Elections Commission. He said he has not seen any evidence of widespread fraud in Wisconsin, how the election was conducted. There were no problems with many machines. Remember, in Wisconsin, we do a random check of our voting systems after the election to make sure that the tallies that we got from these machines match the ballots. There were no problems. Again, no problems identified in any county, let alone the ones that used Dominion for this election. Now, what Dean Knutson said was We had a super huge reliance on mail-in ballots this year that was unlike anything else we've seen. It exposed some questions that we might need to address, and he suggested several things that could clean this up. One of the things is he talked about the use of central count. Most communities in Wisconsin take absentee ballots, deliver them to the polling site where they would encounter if the person voted in person. They're counted there. Milwaukee uses a central count where all absentee ballots go to one place and are counted. He said that's an issue because much like, remember, in 2018, Governor Walker was leading Tony Evers until the absentee ballot count came out from central count in Milwaukee. It flipped the race. We knew for months that because the House election was going to be conducted, that once Milwaukee finished its absentee ballot count, it was going to be a surge of ballots toward Joe Biden. Even with that knowledge, President Trump has falsely claimed a number of times there was a vote dump in favor of Joe Biden in the early hours of November 4th. It wasn't a vote dump. It was Milwaukee finishing the absentee ballot count. But what's been interesting to me is a number of supporters of the president who believe this election was stolen. Maybe it's because the president has been calling it rigged for months. Maybe it's because people just don't trust things anymore at all. But there is a serious issue when you have that many people who believe this election was not fair and square, and that Joe Biden didn't actually win Wisconsin when he did.
And that joint Assembly and Senate committee is now being broadcast live in WisconsinEye. It's scheduled to go late into the afternoon, maybe even into the evening. Okay, new subject. You referred to Justice Hagedorn. I just want to cite a decision that he made. He cast a critical vote in the lawsuit that asked that the court order the legislature to name the Electoral College members. Let's cite from one of his decisions this week. 2 or 3 times he provided a key vote. So let's just read something far more fundamental than the winner of Wisconsin's electoral votes is implicated. At stake in some measure is faith in our system of free and fair elections. This is a dangerous path we are being asked to tread. The loss of public trust in our constitutional order resulting from the exercise of this kind of judicial power would be incalculable. Tough word. Okay, writing for the dissenters, Chief Justice, I'll just summarize a part of it. I would grant the petition and address the people of Wisconsin's concerns about whether the Elections Commission's conduct during the 2020 presidential election violated Wisconsin statutes. It is critical that voting in Wisconsin elections not only be fair, but that the public also perceives voting as having been fairly conducted. Just your thoughts, what you alluded to on the first topic, JR, about the growing importance of Justice Hagedorn, which the conservative Wisconsin Examiner called now our court's John Roberts.
Well, look, Justice Hagedorn broke with conservatives on the stay-at-home order that Governor Evers' administration issued back in the spring. He broke with conservatives about whether the Supreme Court should directly take a case about the state's voter rolls and that people who may have moved and didn't respond in a certain window to a postcard should be taken off the registration rolls. He's now broken with them on whether the court should take a Green Party lawsuit about Howie Hawkins, a presidential nominee, being denied a spot in the Wisconsin ballot. You had in the last week, he sided with liberals in 3 separate requests to take original action on lawsuits. Now, a couple of things are going on here. One, Brian Hagedorn said during his election in 2019 that he was going to side the law based on what the law says, not politics of personal preference. He is now doing what he said he was going to do. He is not a reliable conservative vote, and that has irritated people in the conservative base who said, hey, we went to bat for you because during that election, you complained that your faith was being attacked because you're associated with a school that barred gay employees and gay relationships, that because we did that for you, you should now be a reliable vote for us. Well, Brian's position is he's going to vote on what he believes the law is. Right. Brian is a process conservative. The state Supreme Court, when I started in this building 20 years ago, did not take original action very often. It wasn't asked to. Right. This is a unique process. Usually in Wisconsin, you go circuit court, appeals court, Supreme Court. The state Supreme Court was not set up to be a fact-finding body. That's what the circuit court does. It has a trial, it gathers the facts, the appeals court refines the issues, and the state Supreme Court is a final arbiter of what the law actually says. We have now seen a string of cases go directly to the court, which the court has the power to do. It's just not the usual process. Right. So you have this angst over what Brian's been doing. And also in that opinion you cited from, Brian raised the prospect of how this would shake the faith in elections by doing these things. Right. I've heard conservatives say, well, that's not really part of your view, your purview. It's about what the law says, not people's feelings what the law says. And so some definitely disconnect between the conservative base and Brian Hagedorn right now.
Right. And the issue is whether the court, which has traditionally been a court of last resort, is going to emerge as a court of first resort. Okay, bear with me, JR. I kind of wonked out by this other oral argument in the court. I just find it fascinating. When a local public health official orders schools closed because of the COVID-19, there was this fascinating case that the Supreme Court heard last week. And I admit I'm kind of geeked out by it because of the important precedents that it sets. First of all, private schools were ordered to teach online, challenging those local health orders. The Wisconsin Supreme Court, 4-3, temporarily blocked those, enjoined those. But here's the important questions from having listened to that hour and 35-minute oral arguments. The Supreme Court must decide whether state or local officials have the authority to close schools to fight a pandemic. Question one. Question two, does the authority to close schools apply just to the pandemic broadly or narrowly to sanitation and safety violations? Question three, is a school closed if it is forced to switch to online instructions? I just find that a fascinating question the court's going to have to resolve. Does the practice to teach online violate students' constitutional right to practice their faith, including praying together in person? And let's hear from some of the lawyers here arguing arguing these very questions, please.
Now, the school closure order is subject to scrutiny because it burdens our sincerely held religious beliefs under the state conscious causes. The school closure order does this by indefinitely taking away in-person communal religious instruction. The statement of undisputed facts makes clear that communal religious education is core to our religious exercise. The statement of undisputed facts makes clear that part of our religious exercise is the students engaging in frequent communal prayer throughout the day, communal adoration of the Eucharist. The religious mission thus depends on in-person attendance to be fully realized. What cannot occur is the frequent communal prayer throughout the day, which is in the statement undisputed fact is part of our sincere religious exercise. Not all religious adherents believe that you need frequent communal prayer throughout the day, but we, the petitioners, or at least many of the petitioners do in fact submit that.
Ms. James also identifies in the undisputed statement of facts that virtual learning is not the practice of her faith or her children's faith. It needs to be in person because she believes that her children need to be in person with other children as part of the body of Christ. Online schooling is not an education.
It was never a total school closure. It's ridiculous for them to even assert that. This is one of the biggest threats to mankind other than war. Religious rights have always been balanced with public health, welfare, and safety.
Religion not is just to be treated the same, but is actually given special protection where the people of the state of Wisconsin have said, you can tread no further.
This rule does not talk about closing schools. These schools, in fact, are open. All schools are open.
Every fall in Wisconsin, there's two things you hear. What's the date of the first snowfall? And somebody will calculate the difference between ongoing spending commitments and future tax revenues. This week, that projection came from the Public Policy Forum, which said there's going to be some difficult choices in the 21-23 budget. There's always difficult choices, but specifically, the Policy Forum said spending commitments will exceed expected revenues by $373 million. Their report says the gap between spending and revenues may be the first in 10 years. That's significant because it was Governor Walker and Republican legislators who looked at that problem in 2011, and part of that debate gave us Act 10. Evers, the governor, has said if there's no new federal money and they're still stalemated in Washington, they've given themselves about a week to resolve that. The state may have to budget more than $400 million just to pay pandemic-related costs in the first quarter. Governor Evers and Republicans who control the legislature must agree on a budget by the middle of 2021. But the good news is surplus funds total about $2 million. Okay, JR, I haven't heard from you in a while. Go.
The only thing about this report is it's what happens when you look at the budget on the numbers and not in the political reality of where we're at. So with that, the reserve that they call a reserve of $2 billion, really the reserve is about $750 million. That's in our rainy day fund that we call the Budget Stabilization Fund. I don't see lawmakers and governor or lawmakers for sure, touching that money and figuring out how to do this budget. But we're going to end this fiscal year with a $1.2 billion surplus. I have never seen a legislature or a governor of either party finish a budget with that much money in the bank and not either spend it or try and use it to cut taxes. So the political reality is we have a better picture than what they're portraying because of that starting balance. Now, there are some caveats. You mentioned one, what happens with the cost to keep testing for COVID and contact tracing? If the feds don't provide more money, we're on the hook for that. Two, that budget is built on the idea of accepting federal money to expand Medicaid. Republicans are not going to go for that. That ups the cost about $580 million. That's going to be an issue. So there are other things like that that are going to make it more complex than just, we're only about the real, kind of imbalance we call is about $1.2 billion. If you take all the money on the pot, plus what's going to come in the next 2 years, and compare it to a spending request, you're like, it's a shortfall of $1.2 billion. That really is in line with the last decade of what we've seen. It's not that bad. And really, if you think about it, like, for example, Department of Public Instruction wants $1.6 billion in new general purpose revenue for
in
education.
New money, yes, excuse me. Yeah.
Paring that back, pull some of the levers, and you can figure out how to get to a balanced budget.
Okay, but Jason Stein, the Public Policy Forum Research Director, says there are more wild cards this year. And let's just quote from his report, the forum's report. The existing structural deficit in the state budget and the cost to continue Medicaid services at current levels add up to more than $1.5 billion potential shortfall. Adding just half the dollar increase for K-12 schools that was included in the current state budget, plus 1% annual growth in other GPR spending, such as prisons and the UW system, could push the gap to $2 billion. Just your response to that final Jason quote, JR?
Again, that takes out that surplus we're going to have at the end of this year. So there are some issues. I mean, it's all true what he's saying, but the reality is we've got a good cushion to start the fiscal year, the new budget, and that's going to come into play in how this is done.
Okay. New subject. We learned from state officials, specifically the governor and Andrea Palm, the secretary of the Department of Health Services, that the daily number of Wisconsin residents, those being tested for COVID-19 statewide has dropped significantly by more than 30% in 2 weeks. Now, the health secretary says testing, and the governor says testing is an important part of knowing how measuring the COVID-19 existing cases and the surge and the spread. But just on Tuesday, there were fewer tests that raised Tuesday's positive percentage rate, number of tests that were positive, to 40%, a frightening number. Let's also note that we've had 2.6 million tests conducted since March, and I'm always intrigued by the National Guard has done more than 1/3 of them. I don't know at the start of the year that the Guard perceived its mission as conducting 1/3 of all COVID tests. Now, let's hear a brief comment from Secretary Palm on why the decline in the number of COVID tests nationally is significant. Please.
The number of people currently seeking out a test here in Wisconsin is down. The past 7 days, our average daily number of tests is about 29,500. 2 weeks ago, that average was over 39,000. Our current positivity rate remains quite high, which is an indication that we are not testing enough to gain an accurate picture of the prevalence of COVID-19 in Wisconsin. We're all sort of scratching our heads about it, considering the high level of new daily cases that we continue to see. It's not entirely clear to us what is in the minds of 5.8 million Wisconsinites that has reduced those seeking testing on a daily basis. We have the capacity to do these tests, and so if you need a test, please get a test and then do the appropriate quarantining and isolation depending on the result you receive.
JR, I'm curious to get your reaction to the recommendations from the governor's task force on climate change. Let's just go through them quickly. They're recommending a 60% reduction by utilities from 2005 carbon emission levels, the 60% reduction by 2030, 100% reduction of 2005 levels by 2050. Your report, you said utilities are on track to make some of these reductions, but not those called for in the governor's task force statement, right?
Yep, not quite. So we're on pace to get like 40% reduction compared to 2005. They want to, like 4 years after we hit that number, they want to be at 60% or something like that. But yeah, I mean, the bottom line of this report is that while it has a lot of interesting recommendations, they'd all have to fly with a GOP-controlled state legislature. Talking to people, don't get the impression that Republicans are really going to be enamored of the idea of putting new restrictions on businesses when we're talking about coming out of a COVID-19 inspired recession. So a lot of these are going to be a tough sell in the state legislature in the coming session.
Right. And let's remember that in his first budget or State of the State in 2019, the governor asked for some of these. But let's just quickly go through a few of these other recommendations. Creating an Office of Environmental Justice to help poor and minorities deal with the impact of climate change. $100 million more for focus on energy programs that help pay for energy efficiency and renewable energy projects, and anti-racism training for legislators, their staff, and other Capitol officials because, quote, social, government, corporate, and financial systems deem who benefits from activities that produce harmful emission and who suffers most from the consequences of climate change. There's no doubt in my mind the governor is going to fold this into his 21-23 budget. Right, JR?
I'll be interested to see how much of it finds its way in there. But yeah, I don't think he did this just for the heck of it. This is done to provide a template for some things that actually be done. And one provision in there I know is already in the Public Service Commission's budget request, which is doubling the investment and focus on energy. That's a program in which utilities have to dedicate a certain amount of money, or the revenues, I believe it is, to these programs that help improve efficiency. They want to double that commitment, which is about $100 million.
Right. Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes chaired the governor's task force on climate change, and his comment was, as he forwarded to the full legislature and the governor, we can't ignore the reality facing our state, our country, and our world. We have a lot of work to do to start meaningfully addressing climate change in Wisconsin. Okay, JR, stock picks, please. Rising.
UW pay, Regents passed something this week to increase pay, including for chancellors. Stop, you've heard this before, Steve, but they're saying this is not enough to get us close to our peers, but that it's hopefully a step in trying to closing that gap and retaining talent. That problem's been there for decades, it seems like, with the UW system.
Next.
What I had mixed this week.
You had property taxes.
Property taxes,
I got one bill yesterday. I don't know if you got your bill.
I'm checking the website each day. They're going up, but not as much as like before, especially with school taxes. A report this week came out. A couple of things driving that. But what's driving the increase in school taxes has been the referendums. And remember, under Governor Scott Walker and Republican control of the Capitol, we call it buying down the levee year after year, in which they pump more state money into the school aid formula to lower property taxes or keep them at a certain level. Well, you can't buy it down forever because locals keep increasing their property taxes because of their demands for new buildings, like in Madison here, to exceed spending controls. It just keeps going up. And at this point, I don't think keep buying it down. At this point, keep those things in check.
Yeah, and we check our mailboxes every day. Okay, I'd love to give you a lot of time on your falling because it's a great falling, but we don't have much time, so go, falling.
Elections Commission, look, 2020 has been a unique year. This is a unique one in a unique year. Dean Knutson, a member of the commission, has filed a complaint against both Governor Walker and Megan Wolf, the administrator, saying they broke the law and how they basically approved the results of the presidential election. To get to the point, I don't think this complaint's going to go very far with the commission split 3-3 among Democratic and Republican appointees. But I think, I'm talking to people, the whole point is for Dean is to go to court, to appeal the deadlock decision from the commission, go to court and get clarification about how this process should work ahead of 2024, because Republicans complain that it didn't work the way they think it should have worked this time. And so just keep an eye on that.
Okay. And in the few seconds remaining, it's going to be an eventful 24 or 48 hours in terms of a state Supreme Court ruling on the Judge Semantic's decision, and we're waiting on 2 federal court, U.S. Supreme Court, and right?
I'll be checking the court filings a lot this weekend. So.
Right, and we'll see how this 8-hour potentially hearings, the campaigns, elections, committees of both the Senate and the Assembly. What a week. I'm Steve Walders.
And I'm J.R. Ross.
That's Rewind for December 11.
Rewind, your week in review, is sponsored by the Wisconsin Realtors Association, bringing Wisconsin communities to life with great homes, businesses, and neighborhoods. The Wisconsin Realtors Association, the voice of real estate.